Yo dude, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to show you how to scratch build your very own bases filled with blood for the... No, not the paint. No. So as always with the swatches, I've listed the GW paints underneath each one of the other paints if you can't get hold of those. I appreciate some people might find it difficult to get P3 paints, for instance. As you can see, not a massive paint list, but once you've got these or the equivalent, let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is create the base, and to do that we need to know where Scarbrand is going to sit on it. So you just place the model on the base and just trace around it. I just used some white paint because I had it laying around on my palette at the time. Once we've done that, we're going to want to create the ground texture that he sat in. For that, I'm using some Vallejo Dark Earth pumice. Now you can find this stuff on Amazon, at your local game store, wherever. It's way more cost effective than buying the equivalent amount of GW stuff. In fact, in the UK, it will save you about £40 in terms of money if you bought the equivalent amount of this to the Games Workshop, say Sterland Mud. Once you've got a load of the pumice on the base, start spreading it around and start building up the walls of the crater. We want to have something that's going to contain the bubbling blood that's rising up from the floor here, so we need to have something with some sides to it. As you can see, all you need to do with the pumice is kind of load up your brush a little bit and then push it outwards towards the bottom. By working this way, you'll get this nice cratered surface that comes up the outside, and it'll look like it's exploded out. To help sell the effect, we're going to take some bark. This is just some bark that I got from a pet store. It's really cheap. It's been dried and made sure there's no nasty stuff all over it. And essentially all you do is you seep this in some pumice, put that on the side, and again have it look like it's exploded out from the underside. Keep going with this, adding in wood chips and just bedding them in until you're happy with the amount that you've got on the base. For me, this always looks a lot more like stone than actual stone does, and it's easier to drill into if you need to. Once we've done that and you're happy with it, it's time to get some skulls. After all, this is the base of a greater demon of Khorne, and he demands skulls for the Skull Throne. What you need to do is just get yourself some Citadel skulls, trim some out, clean them up with a hobby knife, carefully of course, and then just seat them in the base. Simply just pop them into the pumice, no glue required, and then help seat them in a little bit with your brush, getting some more of that pumice around the edges. This is going to make them look a lot more like they belong in the scene rather than just placed randomly on the top. Once we've done that, it's time to get our trifecta of Rival Crafts aggregates to really make the base look a little bit more like it belongs as a base. I always think it's a bit weird when bases have just one texture. After all, if you go and wander around, the ground doesn't really look like that. So I use this set of 3, and I will put links to these in a description below. You can also get 6% off your Rival Crafts order by checking out the link in the description below as well. So do make sure you do that. The reason I use these 3 is because the first one gives us some nice big chunks of rock. The second one gives us something that's more like a gravel appearance. And the last one is some super fine sand that I think fits with the scale of 28mm miniatures and therefore gives us the appearance of actual sand grit. You know, something like that on the floor. I find that if you use too large a grain of sand, it can just look like gravel, and really that's not what I'm going for here. So once you've constructed your base, it's time to get everything painted. We're kicking off with some Scale 75 Canterbrick Blue. Now you want to mix this pretty heavily with Flow Improver. These paints are quite thick, so 1 to 3 is about right. Then, without running everything out of the pot, leave a little in there, add some P3 Gravedigger Den into the mix. Now this paint goes in 1-to-1 with Flow Improver, so overall you will have a thinner mixture because the previous paint, of course, had all that extra Flow Improver in it. With the paints that we're putting on the model now, start to build up some highlights and get some nice gradients on things. We're going to add some more Gravedigger Den to the mix, but you can see where we're applying the paint. Places like the top part of rocks, places like the top of the ridge of our crater, and so on. As we're using the airbrush for our bases, it makes sense to use it for what it's good at, which is getting some gradients, just like this one you can see here. Keep building these up, keep building up the colour until you've got something that's quite bright all over. Before we finish the airbrush stage on the base, we are going to hit everything with a nice wash to bring it back down. We want to keep the colours fairly neutral though, so we're adding in some GW Administratum Grey. Overall, we're looking for a cold blue with a brighter set of rocks to help them stand out from the base, so adding in greys will allow us to do that. As before, keep highlighting everything up, keep everything going until you're happy you've got it as bright as you need with that layer, and move on. We're adding in some Ulthuan Grey now, once again with some flow improvement. You can see we're highlighting the same sort of places that we already have. It's always just a question of building the highlights until you're satisfied. That's one of the best things about working with paint. Do it as little or as much as you want. When you're finished, this is the kind of thing you should be looking at. And now, like I said, we're going to darken all of that down. We've got a 1:4 mix with some flow improver and dark tone. This is going to give us a very thin wash that we can apply slowly across the entire base until we're happy with it. This is what it'll look like wet, and once it's dried down, you'll notice that everything's just a little bit more muted than we had it before. And it's going to give us that very cold look to our bases. Before we finish this step though, we're going to add in some Ulthuan Grey highlights on all of our rocks. Now, you can dry brush your bases, sure, but I tend to think this looks better. It takes a little bit longer, but not really that much longer. And all you need to do is use an old brush. You don't mind having a little bit of rough stuff going underneath the bristles, and just build up your highlights as you feel. So here we're hitting all of the little bits of stones to sort of slightly larger aggregate that we put down. And then once we've done, this is what we're left with. Time to start painting those skulls though. Take some GW Steel Legion Drab, thin it a little bit with water, and you might need 2 coats for this. It's not got the greatest coverage in the world. Once we're done with that, we're taking some Menoth White base, adding that into the mix, and as we did with the airbrush step previously, we're applying this in a progressive blend. So everything that we add in goes into the same pot of paint we were just using, and we keep building that up until we're happy with it. Add another set of Menoth White base highlights in before moving on to Menoth White highlight and continue to build those edge highlights on our skulls. You can see we've done a lot of volumetric highlighting. Now I want to stick to the edges and really bring out the brow lines, noses, the teeth, all that kind of thing. Please ignore the mohawk you can see every now and again in the bottom left corner of your screen. Needs a trim, what can I say? Keep doing your highlights until you're happy with all of the skulls, and then it's time to start the next part of the process. To do that, you will need to paint your model in full because you're going to set it on the base very shortly. So let's have a quick chat about UV resin. Now, this stuff's great for a variety of modeling stuff. You can use it for creating icicles on snow bases, things like that. Use it for lakes of water and so on. What we're using it for here, though, is kind of none of the above. We're using this just to create a perfectly level surface. This is a self-leveling, quick drying material. What we're going to do is we're going to put a film of this in the pool that we've got that we're going to fill up with blood. We're going to set that with a UV torch, and then it's ready for the next step. When you're using these products though, wear a mask. I use a full face respirator and wear some gloves. This stuff's not great for your skin. You really don't want to get this on your hands, and try not to get it on your work surface either if you can help it. It tends to not come off once it's set. So once the resin's had time to cure, it's time to work with the next product for our base. This is some water texture from Vallejo. Similar kind of range to their dark earth that we used earlier on in the tutorial. And you want to take the same old battered, knackered brush and start applying this to the base. But you don't want to get a smooth coat. You're looking to get a very rough, textured surface through all of this. Loads of peaks and troughs. Not necessarily like sharp peaks like a meringue or anything, but just make sure it's got a load of different surfaces to it. So it's time for the next element of this base, which is making some big bubbling bits of blood rising to the surface of our pool. Now, what I've used for this is the tops of flight stands. These came from a recent commission I did where we magnetized the flight stands to the bikes. So therefore, we didn't need this. I saved these just for this. If you don't have any to hand though, you could use something like plastic BBs or, some sort of glass bead or whatever it is that you've got. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to set these into the transparent water gel before it dries, so that they dry and are contained fully within what we've got here. We're going to end up with something that looks like bubbles rising from the depths of whatever hellish landscape Scarbrand that's coming from, and it's going to look really cool when they're painted. So I'm just interrupting the video very quickly to remind you that I do stream 4 nights a week over on Twitch. So if you'd like to come and hang out, ask some questions, get real-time answers, and see what I'm painting as I'm painting it, there's links in the description below. We also have a Patreon account which helps fund what I do for a living. So if you're really enjoying the tutorials, why not check that out for even more content? You can also find that in the description below. But if you're enjoying the video, why not give it a cheeky thumbs up, maybe even hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell to get notified for all of the content that I put up. Big thanks to all of you guys watching this video, you're all absolute champions. Now, let's get back to it. Now, I left this to cure for about 3 days. You probably don't need to be as long as that, but some things happened, and so just made sure we took the benefit of having that time. Essentially, just make sure it's dry, both to the touch and what looks like and feels like dry on the inside as well. Then we're taking some very dilute Kador Red base, and the reason it's so dilute is because if we get any overspray, it won't be so noticeable on the model. This is a bit of a pain to hit all the areas underneath Scarborough. There's lots of things that are getting in the way, so I figured a thinner coat of paint would be better. We're then adding in some Naggaroth Night, and in a similar way to how we used our airbrush before, we were bringing up the highlights. We're now going to start enhancing our shadows. So we're going to add in more and more Naggaroth Night as we go, and start to build a texture across this boiling blood. The reason we've gone for purple is because basically it's just to get a little bit of nice dark red with a bit more vibrancy to it. It's going to give us a nice finish across our base entirely. We're going to keep adding in that Naggaroth Night, and we're going to hit smaller and smaller areas. So think of this as kind of the reverse of doing some sort of like scaled gradient to a highlight. We're now going into the shadows more and more with this. And again, same as we've done before, keep going until you're happy that everything is about as dark as you want it to be. Once you're done with that, we're going to start bringing the red back. So now we've flushed out the airbrush, we're going back to Kador Red base, and unlike that first coat we did with this, we're going one-to-one with Flow Improver. We want this to be a bit more on target, so one pass to get things as red as we need to, and this is what's going to help us do it. Make sure you hit all of those bubbles of blood. After all, we did give a nice ring with that purple at the bottom. Let's come with some overspray. This will help to clean all of that up. Now quickly just add in some Flash Gits Yellow, hit all of those little dots, those bubbles with that. That'll really make them stand out. And then we're done with the airbrush. Time to start some brushed highlights on this part of the base as well. We've gone with a 3-to-1 mix of Kador Red and Flash Gits Yellow to really bring out some of the sort of waves, the sort of choppy nature of the tide of our blood that we've got going on here. So get yourself some nice thin highlights, but build them up as much as you want to until you can see all the different elements of this pool of blood. Take your time, it's worth putting the effort in, as I'm sure you will see. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video. It's a bit late to ask, but if you haven't already, why not hit that subscribe button, and I'll leave you with some sexy B-roll on the way out. I had loads of fun painting this mini, and it is a great tutorial, I think, for something you don't really see very often on YouTube. So if you do have a go with it, please come and share some shots over in Discord. You can get some feedback if you like, or just show me what you've got. Thanks very much for watching the video, guys. We'll see you next time. Hopefully, we'll see you in the streams. Peace out.